Ramsgate 1990 is a thriving port. In fact, its correct title is the Royal Harbour, Ramsgate. Work was started on its construction in 1749, but it was not completed until a further 38 years had passed. However, it was ready in time for Wellington to use as the port of embarkation for his victorious army to defeat Napoleon in 1815. In 1821, King George IV visited his Hanoverian kingdom, using Ramsgate as the port of embarkation. The local people turned out to honour him and so impressed the king with their loyalty that he decreed the harbour should thereafter be known as the Royal Harbour, Ramsgate. The honour was commemorated by the building of this 100-ton obelisk, made of Dublin granite and known affectionately in those days as the Royal Toothpick. In 1940, the Royal Harbour again earned honours for the part it played in the evacuation of the British Expeditionary Forces from Dunkirk. 84,000 returning battle-weary troops were landed here and at Margate.
Everything that can float is pressed into service.
Getting everything together, everything they can lay their hands on. And then you look out there and see what you consider to be rowboats. And this is it. This is the way you get back to England.
If the day belongs to anyone, it belongs to the little boats.
One person, a young nurse then, describes what it was like.
I was here when the little ships came from London and they refueled for their petrol to go on the other side. And the sea was as calm as it was, even bluer than today in the sky. And when they started bringing the poor lads over, they were just, it was a terrible sight. Those that were able were put straight onto coaches and sent up to the station to go elsewhere, but the ones I looked after were those that were very severely wounded. They were laying on the floor in this, which is now, well, it was called Pleasure Armour in that day, and it's now a bingo amusement park. Well, that floor was completely covered with bodies, all very, very badly wounded. Some of them were past recognition, and a lot of them had their clothes stuck to their bodies. It was a most horrendous sight, and I tried to, comfort them, but many must have died and were eventually buried at the local cemetery.
On May the 28th, 1990, 50 years after those dramatic events, the Royal Harbour celebrated the part that the little ships played in the evacuation. Councillor Barry spoke on behalf of the Dunkirk Veterans Association and summed up people's feelings.
We're commemorating the 50 years of the evacuation of Dunkirk beaches. Each and every Dunkirk vet has a terrifying but perhaps a distinctive and personal story to tell. A story that's going to be engraved on their memory for the rest of their lives.
There didn't seem any chance of getting off at all. There was nothing moving around that we could get at. And we stayed the night there, and we were blasted most of the time by mortar fire and gunfire. And we dug into the dunes as much as we could to try and protect ourselves. And then we, as dawn came, we thought we saw some movement out in the water, so we came, had a look, and there was a couple of destroyers floating around and one or two other small boats, but they weren't coming in very close. And of course by that time the mole was completely finished. No one, in fact they wouldn't, if you were a walking man, no way would you let you use the mole at all. It was only for wounded. So we came in off the Japan, and We tried to wade at first and found the water was rather deep. I gather at that time of the day that it must have been high water. But we waited until possibly about 11 o'clock, and then tide seemed to drop a bit, so we walked again, and you could walk quite a long way, which meant that you only had to swim for probably about a quarter of a mile. Some could, some couldn't, but we formed a chain as much as we could, hand to hand, and sort of walked ourselves out there, and those that couldn't, those that could swim helped keep the others afloat. It was a bit of a dicey sort of thing, but anyway, eventually we got out to one of the destroyers, and rather hard luck really, because we got to the first one. He said, not us. He said, we're absolutely full. He said, we can't take any more. Try the one behind, which was laying astern. So we waded our way back towards this other one, and very luckily we got on this one, and very glad to see a nice mug of cocoa.
Whilst these stories are different for each Dunkirk veteran, they have a common memory, and that is for the men in the little ships who came to rescue us. Had it not been for them, a lot of us wouldn't be here. There's all sorts of people that just got in these little boats and come out to rescue us and to take us off. Yes. We must. Their courage, their acts of bravery. Yes, we salute them for what they did. Yes. Together, of course, we came back to fight another day.
Right.
And that's why we're here, to say thank you.
Of the ships taking part in the evacuation, and there were over 700 of them, were the paddle steamers Golden Eagle, Royal Eagle, and Crested Eagle. The Crested Eagle was sunk, and although the other two paddle steamers survived the evacuation of the Dunkirk beaches, saving many lives, it's not clear what's become of them since then. So the SS Waverley was chartered for the day to represent the paddle steamers and the part they played on those long days 50 years ago. It sailed from Ramsgate with a complement of veterans and local people aboard to meet the little ships in mid-channel. Councillor Dawson, chairman of Thanet District Council.
Ramsgate played its part in the evacuation 50 years ago. About 80,000 men were landed here, and about 44,000 rounded our sister port in Margate, and I think the majority down in Dover. It was a momentous occasion. I think we're probably seeing the last of these events because we're all getting long in the tooth, aren't we? I think. But
And so the little ships were returning once again to Ramsgate. But this time they were returning from the remembrance services held in Dunkirk to the commemorative celebrations arranged by the Royal Harbour, Ramsgate. The crowds gathered to welcome the Waverley and the little ships being escorted into the harbour together with the Royal Naval vessels. Raymond Baxter was aboard the Waverley.
Chairman, Lord Lieutenant, fellow guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege on behalf of a great many people here tonight to say thank you, sir, for the hospitality which Ramsgate has once again accorded to the little ships of Dunkirk. And I say that advisedly because if I may refer to page 2 of the hymn sheet, you will be able to realize for yourselves that the Association of Dunkirk Little Ships is an association of ships. The people here are merely those privileged or mad enough to try to take care of them and pay them the honor which is their due. And that is why we are here tonight. But in so doing, we who were not aboard those boats at that time, of course, pay tribute to those who were before us and to those who were rescued by our little ships. And therefore, this particular year has been a particular privileged role for us to fulfill. And I am happy to report, Chairman, that thanks to an enormous amount of effort and an enormous amount of goodwill, I think it fair to say that the little ships of Dunkirk have been honored over the past 4 days in a way which is worthy of their history and in a way which is worthy of those men and those times of 50 years ago. The Association of Dunkirk Little Ships intends to return to Dunkirk in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time and so on and so on. After all, if Trafalgar Night is still celebrated every year by the Royal Navy, I see no reason whatsoever that given sufficient effort and goodwill, and if you will forgive me for saying so, some money, and that is in no way a begging letter. We are entirely self-supporting and proud to be so. But in all seriousness, I say to you that in those bits of wood and steel out there, you have a living memorial of something of which we may all be truly proud. And I thank you, sir, and your colleagues for enabling us once again to enter the historic harbour of Ramsgate, and we look forward.
It was a day of honour and celebration, a day of memories, speeches and ceremony. Still the little ships were arriving. One, the Sundowner, had been restored just in time for the event. It holds a special place in the memory of one person who was sent to Dunkirk to help with the evacuation, Lieutenant Commander Charles Jerram.
It was still dark, early morning, very early morning when we first saw Dunkirk. And I can't really explain, but it was hell. And it was ablaze. Aircraft, chaos in the distance. It looked as if it was impossible that anybody would be there and alive. But my boat was shot up as were 5 of the boats. We had one motorboat left that wasn't hit. The Filday and the Brock in the meantime also were sunk, and it left one motorboat, 6 officers and 18 ratings.
He managed to make his way to the warship HMS Worcester.
I happened to walk to the side of Worcester and looked over, and that's when I saw this vessel, Sundowner, which I knew before the war. I knew Commander Lightoller. Well, Ashcroft will tell you later, I think it was 130 personnel came on to Sundowner, whose crew normally were 5. There's 130 personnel on here, soldiers. And they were everywhere. They were not so much standing as sitting and well, on anything they could find to sit on. They had to keep low because the boat was getting a bit top-heavy, to say the least of it. We set out to sea in this lovely ship, Sundowner, at some 6 or 7 knots. Had to manoeuvre very carefully with the weight. And we got about halfway across, as I remember, and 3 planes came over from our bow towards stern, towards Dunkirk. And they were Jerry's. And the soldiers and I sitting there uttered a prayer. And then we saw the centre of one of the planes detach itself from the rest and turn round to come back for us. And we thought, well, that's it. Anyway, as we were watching this plane coming in, to our amazement, it busted to pieces. And we looked up, and there was one hurricane going round us. I took his number, and I reported it, and I hope he got decorated, because undoubtedly he saved our lives. We couldn't. Commander Lightoller tried to zigzag, but he couldn't do much with the weight on board. And we got back into Ramsgate. And as we went past the railings, the inhabitants here very kindly were offering us refreshments, which we gladly took.
All the little ships were found berths for the night in the inner harbour, after a day that had evoked memories for many people. The day ended with another trip out to sea, again aboard the Waverley, for the distinguished visitors and members of the public to witness a spectacular firework display which marked the conclusion to this historic and memorable occasion.